happens prior to the canonical disciplinary process? Secondly, who are the primary participants in the process? And I'm just going to flag them briefly because Jeff has touched on them within that process. Then I want to talk for just a minute or two about a very powerful provision, the godly use of the godly admonition. And then I want to focus in on what are some of the critical preventive practices that your diocese needs to have in place. And that will lead us into just raising the issue of how do you protect the powerless or the less powerful. That's a topic for a whole different 3-hour workshop, so we'll just put a placeholder there and come back to it. So let's jump on in. First of all, when you think about the Title IV disciplinary process, you have to ask the question, when and how does it begin? It begins with an accusation brought by accusers. Now, one of the things you've probably already dealt with multiple times is the bishop's role in discipline and pastoral oversight often occurs when there is not an accusation and there are no accusers. And it's important to keep that clear because otherwise you run the risk of using the wrong tools in your toolkit. You think that you're dealing with a Title IV canonical discipline process, and what you're really dealing with is a precursor or a prototype that may become a Title IV process, but it may not become a process. And so you have to think about, where am I in this process? Sorry, I'm jumping ahead. Where am I in this process, and what might be going on that I need to deal with before I've even triggered the process that Jeff walked us through? So think about this. Not every report you receive constitutes an accusation. That doesn't mean you don't need to take it seriously or you don't need to respond to it. Secondly, an awful lot occurs under the aegis, the authority of episcopal and pastoral oversight that the bishop and the diocese have to provide. That isn't always disciplinary. In fact, by the grace of God, we love it when it isn't yet a disciplinary process, when in fact you're interdicting, you're getting involved before it's reached that point. Now, some of the Title IV tools can be helpful in that process, but that doesn't mean you're in the disciplinary process. Third point, recognize what are some of the other potential triggers that can require that you respond that are, again, not yet an accusation. For example, I always think in terms of what are your legal reporting or responding responsibilities? Child abuse. The second you have a report that there may be an issue of child abuse, you must respond. And I'll touch on this later, that triggers a whole plethora of issues. But not to respond and not to respond expeditiously is a major danger. First of all, because it means a child, a vulnerable child, may be harmed. Secondly, it may severely compromise your witness as a diocese and as a broader church. And thirdly, it can lead to all sorts of legal liability, which you all know. It's the others we have to remind. There's legal liability involved. Secondary, though, you may have situations of harassment or other forms of sexual misconduct that need to be dealt with, whether or not they rise to the level of accusation and discipline. And then thirdly, this may just be due diligence. You may just need to help the bishop follow up on information to see, is there more here? You can think of it, sometimes you turn over a rock to see what's under the rock. And then I'd humbly suggest that your imagination, and I think we all have good imaginations as lawyers, your imagination may be the only limit on the things that could trigger a need for there to be an episcopal or a pastoral response. Better to do that imagining before the problem rather than after the problem. So, my pointers would be know where in the process you are and where you're not. Know what your purpose is. And you need to know, what's my purpose in this moment, in this phase? But also, what's my end game? Where do I think this is coming out? Because usually, Jeff's process kind of drew this out for us. As good lawyers, at the beginning, you have some sense this may well end up in a disciplinary process. And it may end up in an ugly disciplinary process. Or as a lawyer, you may say, I think I'm seeing the tip of an iceberg of sexual misconduct or child abuse or embezzlement. Think about that end game at the beginning of the process. And then always ask the question, what hat am I wearing? As a chancellor, you run the risk of thinking, I'm the canonical investigator. Sometimes you run the risk of thinking, I'm the bishop. Both of those are very, very dangerous mistakes to make. Okay, let me move now to the second topic. Who are the primary participants in this whole process? And I wanted to group them in some categories, but this is straight out of Title IV. And again, Jeff has walked these through in the process. I want to call them out. First of all, foundationally, the participants in the process are the Church of God, the clergy who are shepherding that church, and then the faithful who worship in the church. And it goes without saying, but we should say it, most importantly, the God we all worship and serve. And if we don't start in this whole area from those foundations, that was Phil's charge to us at the beginning, that was Jeff's admonition beginning and end, we don't start there, we miss out on understanding the other participants. Secondly, who are the primary participants? And there you want to think in terms of the bishop. And when you think in terms of what canons do I cite for the bishop's role in this process, I can't cite you a single canon because the bishop's role is woven throughout the canons. In some instances, the bishop's role is delegated, either for meeting with an accused or with a subject of a godly admonition, or in imposing sentence at the end of the process. But there's also the canons that single out the diocesan authority or the ecclesiastical authority, which may be the bishop, but it may be another diocesan function, which the canons take into account if there's not a bishop with jurisdiction in place. Now, there are a couple of ongoing participants who I think are implicit in the canons, but not explicit. First of all, you, the chancellor. The bishop will be turning to you for advice. You will likely be structuring the process. That doesn't mean that you'll be one of the other positions in the process, but it does mean it is critical that you know the canons and that you've thought this through. Secondly, there may be a non-canonical investigator involved. If you've not reached the stage of an accusation, you have not triggered the requirement for a canonical investigator. But you may have triggered the important need to have someone do an investigation. And the question you have to ask at that point is, can this person be the canonical investigator and that role will continue? Or is there a compelling reason that those should be different roles, separate hats that different people are wearing? I'm not going to say that it has to be one way or the other, but it's much better if you've thought about that at the beginning rather than at the end. Sometimes you want to have your absolute best, most experienced investigator do the feet on the ground, just figure out what's going on. Sometimes, for example, when you're sure it's already going to be a Title IV process, or when the accusation is just waiting around the corner, you may say, you know, I want to save my best investigator to be the canonical investigator. So just make that determination at the outset. Now, there are specific roles at the investigation and presentment stage. There are the presenters, the people who come forward with the presentment. There is a drafter of presentments. Canon 4, Title 4, Canon 3, Section 4, subsection 2 says each diocese shall have, or maybe must have, a drafter of presentments. So that's one of those things that Jeff was flagging for us. You already need to have someone in place before you have the presentment. And then, of course, someone has to sign the presentment. Now, this is just an authorized representative of the presenters, the diocesan authority. So usually think it's just a member of that body who gets by resolution or formal action delegated to do that. When we get to the trial stage, you need counsel, or I should say there is a right to counsel for the accused and also for the presenters. Now, of course, at the trial stage, one of the most important elements is a trial court. Every diocese must have a diocesan trial court. Now, under Title IV, we have several other courts. One of those courts is the Court of Extraordinary Jurisdiction. And that court might do an ecclesiastical trial if there is no diocesan trial court, even though there should be one. Or in some instances, there were special arrangements for clergy who might come out of a different jurisdiction. That issue loomed large when the ACNA began 10 years ago. As we've all come more fully into the province, that issue, I think, has receded in value. Now, I have to confess, early on in the governance task force, we were talking about this, and a participant who has not stayed involved in the life of our province kept insisting that this had to be not the Court of Extraordinary Jurisdiction, but the Court of Special Jurisdiction. And they said, you can't say extraordinary jurisdiction, it has to be special. And I think finally I leaned over to the bishop sitting next to me and I just said, why don't we just call it the Court of Extra Special Jurisdiction and move on. Happily, we went with the original language that I think was suggested. So you also, we won't spend much time on the court for the trial of a bishop, but that's critical if the bishop is the one being presented. And then, of course, as Jeff flagged for us, there is an appeal to the provincial tribunal. Now, it's easy to forget that the province also has a role in this. The office of the archbishop does two very important things. When disciplinary action is actually and formally taken, notice of that disciplinary action must be given to the provincial office. Now, it goes only to the provincial office, and the provincial office does what needs to be done with it. There was a stretch where a bishop was erroneously sending an email to all of the College of Bishops about the disciplinary action taken, which is not just not authorized under the canon, it's kind of a violation of the canon. It has some problems. And then also the provincial office maintains the provincial list that Canon Phil walked us through yesterday. Okay, those are the players. I'll take a breath for a moment, and now I want to